This is Breakthrough News, and you are watching the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, well, slightly different than always, but here nonetheless, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back with you.
Eugene, it's good to be back on with you and in person.
Indeed.
We're sitting next to each other.
We are. Well, listen, we're giving the people what they want.
Exactly.
Shout out to People's Dispatch, and we'll have Zoe Alexandria with People's Dispatch with us soon. And there's a lot for us to say here, and we'll give you some of our normal updates as we go through the show. But we really want to jump right into the show because we are very honored to have with us as we start from Gaza, Abubaker Abed, who is a Palestinian journalist and commentator, as I mentioned, in Gaza. So we want to go to him here now as we start the show. Abubaker, thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it.
Well, it's really an honor for us to have you here. And, I guess the first question I will just ask you is, and I think a lot of people are wondering, what is the situation, the humanitarian situation like for those of you who are there on the ground in Gaza at this moment?
Well, it's extremely, that's the usual update because we are people and everyone around us going through incredible circumstances, and it's not only about Israel's bombardment. No, it just goes beyond that because we're being starved and things here are too much expensive. Prices are skyrocketing. Food is not available. Water is contaminated. We're forced to find ways of absolutely nothing just to live in war-torn Gaza. People are so much burnt out, so mentally collapsed. They really want an end. It's just enough. It's been 11 months, and everyone here is just hoping that this will end very soon. So, in terms of the humanitarian situation, it's unfortunately dire. And like 90% of the people here, of the population here, cannot really afford, unfortunately. And most of the food is mainly canned food, which is not good for health. And unfortunately, we have the lowest quality of food, the lowest quality of water, contaminated water. It's absolutely indescribable. But yes, we are resisting to live. We are fighting for our existence despite all these attempts at exterminating us.
Abubaker, I wanted to ask you, you had a life before this genocide started almost a year ago. And you're a big sports enthusiast. You work in sports. And now, obviously, the daily life for you is much, much different, given a lot of what you just described and what we're watching from here. Can you talk a bit about what your life was like before, what your dreams were before, and how this genocide has changed it?
Well, remember, these memories before October the 7th, before this genocide. It's really heartbreaking. But one important point that we want to tell your audience and tell everybody that not be distracted by what we're saying, because our life before October the 7th wasn't even great. Reminded that have been besieged for 17 consecutive years by Israel. The strictly imposed siege on us has deprived me personally from education opportunities in different countries across the globe, like the US and the UK. The employment rates in the tree before October the 7th were also very high. At the same time, many people were enticed, we all through many escalations, 5 wars before this genocide. So it's not all about the 7th in this genocide. But yes, because we lived it through more hellish and nightmarish times, we are now longing and yawning for the life we had before October the 7th. Yes, I know I am someone who has been deprived of my education. I'm still a 4th-year student. I should have graduated. It pains me. My heart aches to remember all of this because This is not the life I want. Rania, I'm just 21-year-old. What years old? What did my life to go through 6 wars? What did I life to go through all this panic and all this trauma? I cannot sleep. The last time I remember that I had a really good sleep was probably 3 months ago. There are drones that are constantly buzzing over our heads. There are Apache warplanes, US made Apache warplanes opening fire at hours at night during the night. So I lost my voice to friend, and at the same my entire day for a 21-year-old in another country the globe. Has he really ever lived through all this? Absolutely no. But the case is that even when I want to live my time and be the one I really want to be, there's no chance. Reminder to you, and this is something I always say, that we as Palestinians are dreaming to while all the world are living to dream. That is the difference between Palestinians and the entire outside world, which is something absolutely excruciating. I don't know what these children, more than 14,000 children have been killed, what have they done to do so? I'm not a war correspondent again. I'm just a commentator and journalist. That's what I do. Tell me about one football journalist who has been reporting on the murderer of his homeland players, managers, and coaches, and even fans. This is not something I should do. Tell me about a football reporter or commentator who commentates on the destruction, the massive destruction of sports facilities. There are only 3 sports facilities of more than 55 facilities across the BC that has been reduced. This is not something I should do. I should be as now, UEFA Champions League nights are held. Barcelona is playing against Monaco. I should be there commentating on that game, not my being threatened every single second. That's not that I want to be. Okay, I thank God for everything. I believe in Allah and what He does, but at the same time, this is the symptom of Israel's US-backed genocide, and at the same time, this is this symptom of the world's sleep of the parties and they not being aware of what Israel is about.
Mm-hmm. And, finally, let me just ask you this question, and as someone who is a journalist, what's your message to those trying to cover this conflict from outside of Gaza in terms of what you've seen of the coverage so far and how, if at all, you feel it could do a better job of giving a sense of what you all are going through?
I mean, what the Western media is doing is absolutely bring everyone working in the Western media to shame. Feel what we are going through. When you write the BBC, for example, I've been given live on the BBC for numerous times before, but then I saw the reporting. How are they trying to fully support the Israeli narrative, which is completely wrong? How on earth are they trying to victimize us when we're not in that position? I know, look, they are simply linguistic criminals, and they hold account for all these linguistic crimes they're doing. In a way or so, they are complicit in the genocide, must be held accountable. Feel what we are going through. It's just that I dream of meat and fish, and then you're going to justify the killing of me, of my people. So how on earth, what would my message be? These people, for me, are not journalists, are shame to the industry. That can't be real when you write that, allegedly, Israeli strike killed someone. This is what the BBC did. CNN, the BBC, the Guardian, and many papers, channels are complicit in the genocide, and they must be held. There's no way I can my voice. There's no way I can really deal with them. What they do is an absolute disgrace. I can't really hold it. Many people here around me reading about the BBC and the CNN on what the main. We're absolutely annoyed and hurt from inside. Why are they doing all this? Why are we not equal human beings? This is the main question. Look, if you're not going to be a human, you don't have to be a journalist. Don't be afraid of being a human. First be human, then go be a journalist. Look at the Sky News, the Middle East correspondent Rafah corridor last time, and when he said that whether this destruction is militarily necessary or not. What an absolute joke. Is massive destruction, civilian, all military necessary? How on earth are they doing this? I mean, there are no words to describe this absolute holocaust from these journalists, because anyone who supports in any way this genocide, even by the writing, even their words, even by anything, are complicit in this genocide, and we must remind the world to not deal with them. It's not about my voice to them. My voice will not be far if I talk to them. Even if they have millions of followers, I believe in the media, in the independence of the individual who's saying a word from you, because I know Breakthrough Newsroom, and I know you, and I know what you have been doing. All a genocide, really tough for most mainstream Western media. You're being and saying all this, challenging and being the crimes by your government is something that lifts us. Reminder to you finally that we're hopeful. We want you to continue living through now it's a year of a genocide. I'm lucky. I'm absolutely lucky to have survived until this. But if you really want to think about your life, being a sick narrative continuing, well, the atrocities we're being through all the time. As I'm human before being a journalist, I really dream of going out with my not. I really see my uncles. I cannot. I dream of having just give me one cup of clean water and I don't need anything else, but I cannot. Just give me one fresh meat. I'm someone who is struggling with my immune system. I'm struggling with my immune system. I've been sick numerous times during war. My mom is sick at the same time. She has problems. She's not able to medicate. She's struggling to find for her some medications. She's not able. My dad's feet and they bleed most of the time. Why? Why Israel is blocking medications from internet? It's not. I'm not trying to employ you for anything. Just keep doing art. It's not all about this. Look, it's dark. What the lights there are shining in you. Why? Why should I go every time to sleep panicked and surprised by Israel's drones and warplanes? They are playing sounds recorded dogs barking and during the night terrorism. That it is terrorism. If you don't want to call Israel as a state, then you have a moral error. You have a moral issue yourself. You don't have anything to do with your humanity when you don't count it out. It's a terrorist state because it's enough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't try to tell you that to cry or to be emotional. No, it's not about affecting you. I'm saying reality. It's not about being a journalist. I'm a human who dreams of the simplest things. I know it's look the little things you have at the moment, from water, clean water, good fresh meal every day, are fantasy to me. I do them every night. This is the core difference. And once again, I'm hopeful in you. We see in you. And again, don't stop. It's all about that to stop. If you leave us alone, then our hopes might be dashed. And this is something we want to see. And Rania, I want you to it's not about crying. I'm smiling at the genocide.
I
No,
don't know how you
not
do it.
at
I
all.
don't know how you do it. You give us hope, actually. You give us hope. Your tweets are so important, by the way. You're one of the few people. I mean, there's a lot of people tweeting in English, but you tweet quite regularly. I follow all of your tweets. The updates are harrowing but important. I encourage everybody, Abubaker, to follow you on Twitter. And also, I appreciate you giving us your time. It's so important to have your voice. It's so important that people hear from people in Gaza. I'll hand it over to Eugene to say any last
no,
words
of
there.
course.
But
Well, just to thank you again, Abu Bakr, for giving us some of your time. We really appreciate it.
Inshallah.
And certainly we'll look forward to talking to you more.
yes.
Inshallah. Best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I mean, 21 years old.
That shocked me when he said that. Honestly, I really did.
He's a kid. He's a kid.
It's such maturity in a way on so many levels, but such an important voice. And I think, as he pointed out, 21 years old and 6 different wars that he's had to go through. I mean, I think there's been only. And people might, hate me for saying this. I think there may be only one other country where people could identify, and that's the Democratic Republic of Congo. I can't think of any other place where people have just, if you're 21 years old, your whole life has been just vicious conflict.
And now every day is just about finding food and trying to make sure you don't die. I want to remind everybody, Abubaker is on Twitter. It's important you follow him. It's it's at ABUBAKER ABEDW. That's Abubaker Abed W. Please give him a follow and send him, messages, kind messages. I don't know what else to do in this situation. Other than that, just amplify his voice and voices like his in this horrific situation that's almost reached a year anniversary of a horrific genocide.
Indeed. Well, we want to move here now to Lebanon and the ongoing issue of the attacks that Israel has committed in the past several days. We are very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Elijah Magnier, who's a veteran war correspondent and analyst. Elijah, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
It's great to be with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you here. And I guess my first question I'll ask you is what do you think the impact of this attack is? I mean, obviously, Israel was trying to show its prowess. I mean, is this something that, anyway, I'll just leave it there. I mean, what do you think the impact of this is? What does it say about the relationship of forces between the two parties?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that this is one of the most important questions to tackle today, because of a lot of misunderstanding around. 90% of Hezbollah communication system is wired. It is not wireless. This is why they have cable everywhere. They have cable under the ground. They have in the city under the ground in the south of Lebanon. They have established cable there to be able to communicate between the central command, and or the combatant who go to the front, and they do not use mobile phone or pager or the ICOM or any other communication system. They go and fire their rocket, missile, laser-guided missile, drones, and they return under the ground, which means that the wire system of communication that represent the core heart of Hezbollah's military has not been touched. The 10%, the remaining 10%, represent various communication systems that are wireless. Among these wireless communication systems, there are the ICOM, that is called walkie-talkie, and then the pager. Therefore, these two tools of communication have been affected partially. And the reason why I'm saying partially is because for many decades, Hezbollah has used the pager. And if Hezbollah, as the Israelis are telling us, count between 120 to 150,000 members, then there are still at least 100,000 that have not been affected. And they're still using the old pager. The only problem with the new batch that arrived, where Israel hid inside the battery a very sensitive explosive, plus the metal balls imitating ISIS suicide belt. And in this way only, they have managed to inflict serious damage on a certain number of Hezbollah and civilians, paramedical, doctors, and other people. And these attacks are indeed a terrorist attack because they happen in many different civilian places where people in supermarket, in their home, gathering with other people, found their pager exploded. And many people in the security domain that guard supermarket or mall or expensive and posh shops have been also affected. So this is directed toward the population plus Hezbollah, and is not only Hezbollah. Now, what happened in the ICOM, also again, the ICOM has been used for decades. And the new batch that came with the pager included the battery to the ICOM. But the battery to the ICOM caused a larger number of fatality because its battery is larger and bigger. But also there were fatality in the lithium batteries that are used for solar system, which means civilians that use it because there is no electricity in Lebanon and they have to find an alternative, find themselves with their solar panels exploding. People put it next to the door or on the roof or in a garden, or they were around it. They all have been hurt. So that's the biggest terrorist attack that Lebanon has ever seen, and it has raised the alarm all over the world about the people concerned about their own mobile phone. And if these mobile phones can carry explosive, as Israel has managed to tamper with and implement not only the explosive and the metal balls, but also link it to the electronic circuit and gave radio signal to explode the first one on the first batch, and 26 hours later, the second part.
You know, Elijah, obviously, we saw that the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, spoke earlier today. And indeed, this was, by all objective views, if you're being objective, a act of terrorism, but it was described by Western officials and Western media as something incredibly innovative and something also strategic and precise. And as if, you know, the Israelis, if you've, I'm sure, seen them on Twitter, as I have, are acting very smug. You would think that from the way they're acting that they've actually like defeated Hezbollah or something. I mean, you make a very good point that in fact their communications network still stays fully intact. Hassan Nasrallah said that their command and control infrastructure is still intact. So I guess my question for you would be, you know, from your vantage point, did Israel gain anything from this other than terrorizing the people of Lebanon, of course? Did Israel gain any strategic advantage from this? And moreover, do you see this as leading to a higher likelihood of regional escalation?
Strategically speaking and intelligently speaking, from the military approach, it would have been a good hit had Israel started a war and exploded all the communication system, creating a chaos, but not preventing Hezbollah from continuing communicating among themselves. In 2006, a war that I have covered on the ground, Hezbollah's communication system was almost destroyed. And yet Hezbollah managed to cease fire on the same instant, fire 300 rockets in the same moment, in the same hour, and maintain a total discipline of the forces through other ways of communication system. Because Hezbollah has another communication system that is made locally, domestically, and has changed, and is good to say it now, the compromised fiber optic landline communication system when Japan delivered all the keys necessary to Israel to be able to decipher the communication. Hezbollah was aware of it and has changed all the system, and now it has another communication system that is more sealed. And we understand that because there are thousands of fighters already that Israel did not manage to move on the side or to eliminate. If they have resorted to the pager and to the icon, it's because they wanted to do something folkloric. And Benjamin Netanyahu loved this as he attacked Hodeidah in Yemen and said, look at the harbor burning for 3 days. This is what he aimed. But strategically speaking, it makes no sense.
No, I think that's a very, very good point. And I'll just ask you this here in our last few minutes. I mean, I think it raises a whole other question, which is, there's so much in the Israeli media and the international media that Israel is planning a big operation vis-a-vis Lebanon. But given the 2006 war, the time that's passed, the experience that Hezbollah's gained in the war in Syria, I mean, it seems highly likely that this, would not just be a walk in the park. And the idea that these kind of terroristic actions are suggesting Israel is so superior to Hezbollah is likely not the case.
Well, let me say one thing. For months, Hezbollah is really finding it very hard to look for a target among the Israelis along the borders because they are hiding. I really don't understand how Israel is going to start a wider operation and offer themselves as a visible target to the Hezbollah laser-guided missile that they can hit from 8 kilometers, while the Merkava can reach only 4 kilometers. They will be like sitting ducks. This is why I don't think the Israelis are stupid enough to walk into Lebanon, but they can start a wider aerial operation. Now, having said that, we need to understand that this was a brilliant intelligence operation by the Israelis. Nevertheless, it doesn't have any strategic objective. Third, the Israelis will never achieve any objective if they walk into the Lebanon, because first, they will never see the settlers in the north returning, and they will have more body bags returning to Israel. But they will achieve one thing. Benjamin Netanyahu will remain in power for a longer time, and this is the only objective that he wants.
Well, Elijah, I know you have to go. Thank you so much for joining us. Elijah Magnier, hopefully everyone's following you. Really appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eugene, what a week. What a week.
Well, Rania, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You are Lebanese. You don't just live in Lebanon.
That's true.
One thing I think is obviously, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think a lot of these kind of terroristic actions by Israel, I think a lot of what they're hoping is that, for people who maybe don't like Hezbollah, people have their critiques, that they can kind of drive wedges, by making it appear that it's more dangerous to have them there. But I wonder, given the huge support in Lebanon for the Palestinian resistance, what you're hearing, what you think, what your own views are, is even if people have their critiques of Hezbollah, have their issues, if this does actually drive people further away, or if it seems so unjustified and so heinous that it actually creates more national unity in the country.
No, I would say more on the latter, in the sense that, there's certainly going to be your people who, no matter what, they're going to hate on Hezbollah. Hezbollah can do nothing right, ever. And it's always Hezbollah's fault. You're going to have those hardliners regardless. That said, this certainly did unite the country. You had a lot of politicians who are in a different parliamentary bloc than the one Hezbollah is in, come out and say they are with the resistance, they're against what Israel did. And they see this as an attack on Lebanon's sovereignty, as it is. And they see it as an attack on Lebanon because this was an attack that was across the country. It was nationwide. It was completely indiscriminate and random whoever was around when a pager or a walkie-talkie blew up. So absolutely, this has definitely united more than it's caused a wedge, by far. And I mean, it's so obvious. Like, you don't even need to really think too much about that, because it's pretty obvious what's going to happen when you attack a country. Any country that's attacked for any reason is going to unite against who attacked them. And in this case, everyone's angry at Israel, even if they might not like Hezbollah so much, angry at Israel because Israel did this. So yeah, I mean, right now I think people are also quite frightened because it was just so random. It's the kind of, at least like in a war when there's fighting, you can kind of stay away from certain areas that are going to be hotter or heavier. But in this situation, it was a matter of really random, indiscriminate violence, just like a terrorist attack, because it was a terrorist attack.
Yeah, picking an orange out of the market, and just because the guy next to you had the pager, next thing you know, you're dead or
Right.
maimed or whatever, and thousands and thousands and thousands.
It's just
of people.
completely ridiculous and outrageous. And 2 days in a row, I mean, to have it done the next day, it's just, and then to have someone like Congressman Brad Sherman, who's a Democrat from California, come out and call it precise and innovative and strategic. And then on top of that, basically say all Lebanese people are human shields for Hezbollah.
Yeah.
It's sick. It's just completely sick. But Eugene, I do want to say something before we have before we introduce our next guest, because we didn't get to say it at the beginning.
Yes, of course.
And that is that we are an independent media outlet, Breakthrough News, so we are able to sustain ourselves based on your support. So I encourage you to, if you are able, please become a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can help support our programming. You can also access exclusive content, as well as pretty cool merch, like these very cool mugs, Breakthrough News mugs. And on top of that, at the very least, please do make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm, which is not being very kind to us lately. We're convinced we're shadow banned, you guys. It's one of those days. But yes, please do smash that like button. It's the easiest thing you can do. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to Breakthrough News on all social media platforms. And if you can, hit that notification button so that you get notified in case the algorithm's messing with us and isn't showing you our content otherwise.
Absolutely. Hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get the things you subscribe to. We're also, all over. So find us Telegram, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're all there /BT Newsroom.
Yeah.
So very happy to have had Elijah with us, to have Abubaker with us. We're now going to keep moving the show forward, and we're very happy to have David Hundeyin with us, the Nigerian investigative journalist and author, to talk about the ongoing, I don't even know what to call it, ridiculous attempts by the U.S. government to censor what people are watching in Africa and around the world. David, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I guess my first question for you here is, it seems like so much of this they've banned Africa Stream, RT, and they claim that Africa Stream is somehow Russian and connected to RT secretly through intelligence links or whatever. But we can get into that. But I think, to me, the maybe underlying issue here of what the U.S. government has done in trying to restrict the operations of various Russian media and various independent media like Africa Stream is the assumption that somehow Africans in particular cannot think for themselves, and that the positions and feelings that people have all around the continent on whatever the issue may be, the war in Ukraine or the role of Russia and China in the world or whatever, is only happening because they're being secretly manipulated, which just seems massively paternalistic to me. But I wonder your thoughts on that question, David.
So I have two thoughts on that. And the first is, I find that entire concept to be, in addition to being disgustingly racist, I find it incredibly offensive. Personally, I take it very personal because, so I work with African Stream. I know the amount of effort that we put into what we actually put out. I know the amount of fact checking we do. I know the amount of technical accomplishment it takes to actually put out a piece of content, right? Because we have a thing in our newsroom that if you wouldn't want to watch it, then you shouldn't put it out there, right? We put a lot of effort into what we do. And then to hear the US, I believe the number 5, was it number 6 citizen of the US, coming on air to call us by name and basically reduce all of our hard work to Russian. He didn't even say they're funded by Russia or funded by RT. He said they're secretly run by RT, with the inference being that these guys are too stupid to even put out any of this stuff, to create any of this stuff on their own. It can only be the Russians. And there's a very long history of this sort of it's much more than just paternalistic thinking. There's a very long history of this incredibly boneheaded sort of thinking in the US. I personally trace it back as far back as the 19th century, where this fictitious ailment called drapetomania was invented, with the claim that any African wanting to be free was suffering from a mental illness, because as we well know, Africans have no human desire to be free. The natural position of an African is supposedly slavery. This happened again in 1930. This was at the peak of the Jim Crow era. at a time where Africans, both in the diaspora and on the continent, where I believe in the US, the term was 3/5 of the human being. In Africa, we weren't even classified as humans. In some parts of the continent, like in Southern Africa, Africans were classified as flora and fauna. And in a place like Nigeria, where I come from, Nigeria wasn't even classified as a country under occupation. It was classified as a corporate object owned by the Queen. We're ruled by something called the Royal Niger Trading Company. And in the midst of all that, Africans on both sides of the Atlantic started uniting to come up with some sort of Pan-Africanist thinking. And the US government said it's the Soviets that are behind it. In the 1960s, during the African independence era, which coincided with the civil rights movement, because they were both joined at the hip, it was the same thing. Martin Luther King is a Russian agent. Kwame Nkrumah is a Russian agent. Patrice Lumumba, Fred Hampton, you guys are all Russian agents. In 1985, the apartheid head of Prime Minister of South Africa claimed that blacks are happy in South Africa under apartheid. And the only blacks who aren't happy are those who have had Russian ideas pushed into their heads. So it's like we're in 2024 and this same thing is being rinsed again, that without the involvement of this Russian subversive funding or indoctrination, or whatever, these group of people, black people, are just too fundamentally stupid to have any positions, any ideologies, any voices, any thoughts of their own. They can only do something when there's the hand of Vladimir puppeting them.
It's really incredible. It's so paternalistic and, like you said, racist. I also thought it was interesting in this New York Times article announcing after Anthony Blinken's speech that they would be putting these sanctions, these new sanctions on like basically RT, classifying it as Russian intelligence. And this speaks to the broader issue of just trying to muzzle any media that isn't U.S. controlled. I'm going to quote from the New York Times. They said, "The goal of the sanctions and diplomacy is to alert countries where RT remains a popular source of global news, including in many parts of Africa, the Middle East, and South America, to the potential for Russian influence campaigns against governments that fall out of the Kremlin's favor." So, of course, on top of accusing this or that outlet that's popular, that's saying, you know, that's pushing out anti-imperialist ideas, is all Russian-backed, there is this also clear fear of any kind of media that isn't giving a U.S. government perspective on things. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that, because as we see these geopolitical shifts around the world, you do see a lot of people in global South countries really changing their views of the U.S. based on the U.S.'s own behavior, not because Russia's telling them to.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the classic behavior of a dying empire, if you like. When a star is in the process of turning to a supernova, is at its most dangerous, and is at its most irrational. That's what the U.S. is doing. We've seen this in so many ways, not just in Africa, but it seems like it's a recurring motif in pretty much everything the U.S. does with its foreign policy now, where in trying to accomplish one goal, which is to hobble the other guy, it ends up indirectly strengthening the other guy. So, for example, when it tried to, I believe the Secretary of Trade, Janet Yellen, said in her own words that the goal was to hobble China, to stop China from accessing the ability to manufacture a certain type of chip. Guess what? China simply went ahead and found a way. And now, based on the crazy stunts that this great ally of the US that shall remain unnamed pulled yesterday, half of the world is going to be pivoting toward Chinese chips and Chinese electronics, right? So they've essentially sanctioned their own companies. They did the same thing with the sanctions on Russia. They effectively sanctioned Russia. They sanctioned Western suppliers because now they don't have access to Russia's markets. Russia simply pivoted toward China and other suppliers. So Russian consumers and the Russian economy is not suffering, but Western interests are suffering. So effectively, they've sort of self-sanctioned, and they're doing the exact same thing in Africa all over again, where instead of trying to show that, okay, if we claim that what narratives being put out by the likes of African Stream are wrong, they're not accurate, that the US is actually a force for good in Africa, this is the evidence, this is what we're doing. Instead of trying to do that, it's, oh, let's ban them. Let's stop people from having access to them. And they don't seem to realize that by doing that, they're just proving our point even further. Because what business do you, it would have been different if Blinken had said we are restricting access to African Stream in the US. US citizens shouldn't see it. That's fine. That's America's prerogative to determine what Americans get to see, right? Because Americans have electoral control over who gets to decide those things for them. But then you are standing in DC and making decisions effectively on behalf of an entire continent. So you are telling a platform like Meta, which has billions of users across the world, to deplatform a news organization based in Nairobi, Kenya, right? So millions of people, literally millions of people across the continent and across the world who follow African Stream have essentially had that taken away from them by some sort of imperial diktat from Washington. And that only proves the point that we have constantly tried to make, that the US is an empire. It behaves like an empire. These are the actions of an imperialist. And they just can't seem to stop themselves.
One of the things I'm curious your thoughts about in just terms of, the why this moment and why now. I mean, do you feel that they're worried, the United States, that is, that they're losing control of Africa? I mean, I think one thing about Africa Stream is it's, produced by younger Africans. It's very on the pulse of younger Africans, the movements that are happening all across the continent, the questions that people are talking about. I mean, do you think there's an element of fear here, not just of what people may do if they are able to access news sources like Africa Stream and others, but what they're already doing, and the fact that Africans and younger Africans are producing their own media to reflect their own experiences, which are obviously, it seems to me at least, moving in a different direction than where America and Europe might like?
I believe that's exactly the problem. What they've been used to is being able to operate almost sort of unopposed in Africa, because for the longest time, the biggest problem Africa faced was there was a huge asymmetry in global information. So, as you may or may not know, the entire, pretty much something like 90 something percent of Africa's digital satellite television market, for example, is dominated by a single company. It used to be South African. It's now owned by Canal Plus, which is a French company. So essentially, an entire continent's digital television is now owned by some guy in Paris, right? And it used to be owned by some white guy in Joburg, right? So there used to be this sort of very tight control over what information gets into the heads of Africans. So in 2022, for example, when the decision was made to sanction RT, stop RT from broadcasting in Europe and the US, RT, as you may or may not know, was also stopped from broadcasting across Africa, even though Africa had no business with any of that. Africa was not involved in the sanctions package on the Russians, but because the RT feed that fed MultiChoice, which is the sort of monopoly entity on the African continent, came from a European supplier, and the European supplier had to follow EU sanctions, that happened, basically. So effectively, you've had one guy in Washington switching, turning switches on and off for 2 billion people or so, which absolutely should not be the case. But now, because of the rise of the internet and social media, and the use of social media by platforms like African Stream, which, as you know, even though it has a native website, it focuses almost exclusively on social media platforms, right? Which is why it's so influential. We've been able to leverage that and get this message out to people. And for the first time, people are seeing that this is not just like some airy-fairy ivory tower narrative that some Cornel West type person says on CNN, that I can actually connect to this. I can see why my economy is depressed. I can see why I don't have jobs in my economy. I can see why, despite so and so $billion of aid that supposedly is coming into my country, I can see why I don't see any evidence of it. I can see why some US ambassador will claim that they're investing $10 billion into the railway corridor in my country, and there are no jobs coming out of it. I can see why now, because there's this platform that is showing me that this is what has been done elsewhere, and this is what is being done here, and that's the difference. And for the first time, I can connect with it and make that connection, and then that turns into political action, which apparently is not what the US government wants to see. But I don't know what to tell them, because unfortunately for them, unfortunately from their point of view, the truth is this is the world's youngest population. So a country like Angola, for example, the median age is 16.5. Nigeria, the median age is 18.9, right? Statistically, more than 40% of Africans are teenagers. This is the world's youngest continent. So when you have that kind of young population that now has, relatively cheap, widespread, high-speed internet access, it can only ever be a matter of time until that information equalization takes place, and then you'll start to see real political movements toward that outcome that you don't want. So it's either you're going to drop a nuke on the whole continent, or you're going to have to deal with the reality that the paradigm is shifting, and these people are not going to be your cannon fodder, and the sort of like as I describe it, organic traffic cones next to the mines and the oil wells that you have in your imagination. So good luck to them.
Winds of change are blowing. Well, as always, we appreciate you joining us here on the show. David Hundeyin, thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's if you just let people decide for themselves, they're obviously going to love what America's done to Africa. America doesn't need to propagandize anyone. I don't even know why they bother.
Yeah, it's. I agree with David. I think that there's nothing could really stop an idea that's come, whose time has come, and I think that's what's happening. Africa, 1.4 billion people, everyone's young. I think there's very little chance they're going to be able to hold them down, but they'll play their tricks.
Yeah,
they'll play their games. But we really appreciate David. Hopefully, Africa Stream is still up on X, and it's still up on TikTok, I believe. So definitely do what you can to back them up. Check out their website. A lot of great stuff coming from young Africans across the continent, producing their own media about their own experiences. Well, now we're going to turn back here to the United States, the U.S. South, to the state of Tennessee, to a very important struggle that is being waged by drivers there, rideshare drivers in the state of Tennessee. They've been striking, they've been protesting. We're going to get into all of that. We are very, very honored to be joined here by Arcangelo Wilson, who's the co-president of the Tennessee Drivers Union, and Cecilia Prado, the chair of Aluta Sige. Thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let me tell you, the pleasure is all ours to have you here. It's very, very interesting struggle. Arcangelo, I'll start with you. I mean, maybe just give us a sense of, what are the conditions for drivers there where you are in Tennessee, and what are you guys organizing around? What would you like to see change?
Well, thank you for having me. Basically, Uber, most of the companies that normally when they start, they start on a good footnote, trying to care for the people. But as the time goes on and they start getting a foothold, they start to manipulate the system. The regulation of these two giants, it is not working because the loophole they're getting, they are not using against the drivers. So that's why, as the Tennessee drivers, we decided to make a strike planning about 4 months ago, and then 3 weeks ago we did the first strike, and then last week we did another one. And what we are calling for is for better pay. Second, try to get much staging at the airport. We need a bigger lot. Also, the sanitation of the bathroom at the airport is really poor. Basically, we also have women drivers, and the bathroom are not good for them to use. So we are also trying to advocate for women bathroom. So there has to be an equality. We are also trying to ban out of state drivers that are coming here, that have been sent by Uber or Lyft to come and drive here in the state. We are also trying to find what they call fixed drivers. In any kind of job, there has to be a limit. So we are also trying to see there has to be a cap on number of people that employed a year. Because you cannot just, I know it is advantages for them to infatuate the market. But what about the people, the drivers or the locals? Where would they go? How are they going to survive? So this is what we are trying to advocate for, and we are now getting attention of our locals, officials, And I hope next week, I hope the meeting that we will have with them is going to be a good one. You know, we likely hope to have some outcome from there.
No, that's really important. And Cecilia, I guess I'd want to ask you, could you comment on, for those who aren't drivers, why should people care about the conditions of these drivers? And not just the conditions, but why should they care, for their strike to be successful?
Of course. So Uber and Lyft drivers like Arcangelo are at the forefront of the fight against the expansion of the gig economy, right? So the drivers in Tennessee are organizing because they are tired of being robbed by Uber and Lyft, just like Arcangelo was saying. According to them, Uber and Lyft are taking over half of their payout for rides, which, it's how it has changed. It's been over a decade since they first were established, when they used to take 10%, then 20%. Now they're taking over half. And it also, so that means that folks are working 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, just to put food on the table, right? And they can do that because drivers are classified as, the correct classification for them is gig workers, right? They're classified as independent contractors, but it's more accurate to portray them as gig workers. As gig workers, they get none of the benefits of direct employees, and also none of the benefits of a traditional independent contractor, right? They cannot set their own hours. They cannot have control over how they work, right? And so this idea of flexible work is a scam, right?
Yeah.
So they say, well, they're independent contractors because they have flexible work. Some people call them innovators, right? But all they really innovate is new ways to evade laws, avoid accountability, and find new ways to maximize exploitation, to maximize their profits, right? And they do this because they have engaged in a aggressive lobbying strategy to secure support from both the Republicans and the Democratic Party. So they are able to buy politicians and expand this gig economy. And so the thing is, right now it is drivers, but we know that the gig economy is expanding. We have seen that they are using it in warehouses, gig economy for warehouses, gig economy for restaurant work. So this is going to affect the entirety of the working class, and this is why we need to support the fight of the drivers.
Mm-hmm. Arcangelo, one of the things that I think is notable, in terms of the role you all are playing is that it's so multi-sided. I mean, the work that you all do, and we're talking about Nashville here, huge tourist city. In addition to keeping the economy running, there's also a public safety element, in terms of, it's Nashville, people going out, going to bars, doing things like that. I was hoping you could just talk about that a little bit, because I think sometimes, people open their phone, they get in, they get out of an Uber, they don't think about it. But really, without you all in a city like Nashville or anywhere, so much of the economy couldn't really operate, and people's daily lives would be much more difficult.
Yeah, that's one of the things people really don't understand. They think that Uber or the drivers it is their right to get moving with the driver. But they don't understand that the driver is also trying to meet his end need. Without the drivers, the economy of Tennessee, which is a tourist destination, there will be no more mobilities. And that's also saving the people. I can say from 10 years ago, 11 years ago, before Uber and Lyft became active, how many people were dying because people were driving drunk? With the current state now, the people driving are those who are under the influence. Sometimes either they are not following, they are not law-abiding citizens, but those who are law-abiding citizens and they don't want to get into law, they end up using Uber. And that have saved a lot of people their lives, because the safety is number one of the issue. Uber and Lyft were established. And without the drivers, if the platform is there and nobody's driving, how can you get around? There's no way. So with the Tennessee drivers, or not just only in Tennessee, all over the world, how many drivers do we have? It's over 5 million drivers, or 1 point something billion people driving. Without them, the mobility or the safety of the people will not be guaranteed. You know, so they are always maintaining. It is a 24 hours work. So if I'm not on the clock, there's somebody on the clock. That's providing the safety delivery to the people. You know, as Cecilia said earlier, it is not just only about getting a ride share only. They are now delivering, there are those that are doing food delivery or groceries. Without this, it will make the life easy on everyone. And instead of getting off from work and you are tired, you can do the instant card, or you can do the door dash, and you get your thing delivered. So that's making everybody safe, and is something that people should understand. What the drivers are fighting for is not to be overcharged or not to be rough. They're already getting rough. They're getting more. When a driver asks a rider, when you pick one either from the airport or from downtown to airport, and you say, "Sir, how much did you pay?" or "Ma'am, how much did you pay?" You hear somebody say, "I pay 50, I pay 40." Are you only getting $11 downtown? You know, that's a big gulf. You know, they're already paying, getting more from the rider, but they're paying the driver less. So we are not fighting for the Uber or the Lyft to go and rob the riders, but we are fighting to make sure that we get the decent living we need.
It's really, really unbelievable when you think about that. It is really robbery. But so I want to ask, for those who are watching and are rightly infuriated by the sort of theft that you're talking about and the conditions you're talking about, I'll ask this to both of you. How can people get involved? How can they support your strike?
One of the things that you can do, you can follow the Tennessee Drivers Union on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok and Facebook, and stay updated. There's a solidarity pledge, which you can access by bit.ly/TDO Solidarity. And that way you can show that you stand with the drivers, especially if you have traveled to Nashville, if you're a tourist, former or future tourist, or are, a resident of Tennessee, member of an organization, of a church. Please sign on the pledge, and then I'll let Arcangelo add anything I missed.
Yeah, really, there's nothing more to do. As she's already stated most of the thing. You know, all we want is, as a community, when we work as if in unity, nothing that we cannot overcome. It is important that we work as a society, because what we are doing is also benefiting them by getting home safe and getting to where the destination that they require to go. Without those, really, the safety, and that's why we are also advocating for the scooters. There has to be a time limit for the scooters, because at night there are some that are still driving them and they are drunk. That's also hazard to the people on the street and also to the drivers. So with those one, if people cannot stand with us, it's going to make it difficult for us to go for the fight. But if there's a more voice that we hear from all over the walk of life, that's going to work for us, and our voice will be heard either by the state legislative or by the two giants who are robbing the people or the drivers.
Well, this is a critically important struggle, and we're going to keep covering it on Breakthrough News. We really appreciate you both being willing to come on. Arcangelo Wilson, Cecilia Prado, thank you so much for some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a very important. I mean, everybody takes Ubers and Lyfts, and people order Uber Eats and, all the various gig economy delivery services. And there's someone behind each of those who's just trying to make a living. So just to hear that, you're taking half or more of what they're earning is unbelievable. Especially, it's quite expensive.
Yeah, to say you're taking $50 from the airport to your downtown hotel and they're getting $11 is like completely
It's outrageous,
ridiculous. And the things they foist on them, and I mean, there's a lot we could say about this, but I think one thing that I want to say about this, honestly, before we move on, is one of the key issues here is the misclassification of these workers. Uber, and Cecilia spoke to this in the interview, Uber and Lyft control everything about what they do, basically. They determine everything. That's just what it comes down to. So the idea that they're independent contractors, not employees, is ridiculous. But what's important to note is that Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, upcoming presidential candidate or current presidential candidate, maybe the next president, she claims that she's for workers. She's been spending the past week saying, I'm for unions, I'm for this, I'm for that. One of her top advisors is her brother-in-law, Tony West. Tony West's job? He is the general counsel of Uber. The cases he's been fighting the most in states around the country to prevent Uber drivers like Arcangelo Wilson, who you just saw, from actually being declared Uber employees and forcing Uber to actually be able to pay them significant salaries and benefits and to give them the right to organize in an NLRB type way. This is what Kamala Harris, one of her top advisors, her brother-in-law, this is what he does to make sure that people like the gentleman you just heard are basically forced into a situation where they're making poverty wages. That's one of her top advisors. And Tim Walz, Coach Walz, from Minnesota, is actually a big advocate as well that these drivers are independent contractors, not employees. The sweetheart deal he created with Uber for the state of Minnesota is 100% designed to make sure they remain independent contractors. So if you heard what you just heard, and it sounds ridiculous to you that an Uber driver in Nashville or anywhere else is making $11 on a $50 fare, that sometimes 50%, I believe was the number they used, of the fares are being taken by Uber, that they don't have access to appropriate facilities to use the restroom and other situations like that they are forced to work very long days in order to make ends meet. If you think that is bad, just know that Kamala Harris is supporting it. So when people talk about the lesser of two evils, it always depends on who you're talking about. All right? And I think it's important we put that in there, and it's important we note that because there's a lot of misinformation going on. Tony West, look him up. Kamala Harris, top aide brother-in-law. Tim Walz, Uber, look it up. They want to keep these workers living in poverty wages. They do.
I just want to say
Please.
real quick that as important as it is, I just want to apologize that I do have a little bit of a cold.
Oh, okay.
I feel like you can hear it.
Okay.
And so I'm sorry. I want to apologize for any coughs.
I didn't even notice.
That's a lie. We talked about it before we went on air.
Yeah, I'm trying to
I
make you
feel like it's a
better.
conspiracy against me, honestly.
Trying to make you feel better.
I think somebody came at me and gave me a cold. It's amazing how a cold can, it's just like a little cold and it just ruins your week. But it's okay. At least I don't have Kamala Harris's advisor trying to keep me from making a living wage.
Yeah.
I
mean,
mean,
your brother-in-law.
Yeah, seriously. Jeez.
Anyway, so we want to move forward here. We want to move to Latin America. Quite a bit happening, especially in the country of Honduras, but more happening, I think, in many other countries as we see the right wing really trying to round on progressive governments and move them out of power. As always, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Zoe Alexandra, who's the editor of People's Dispatch. Zoe, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks so much for having me. And Rania, I hope you feel better.
Thank you. Zoe actually gave me honey yesterday, so I'd feel better. It was special honey, and
Wow.
it helped.
I didn't even know you guys knew each other that well. You're really revealing a lot of things to the audience.
But
here.
she gave me honey. She was basically like my doctor.
Oh, well,
Zoe's a doctor in her free time.
she does have medicine, I think, in her family.
She does.
So some things. So do you. Anyway,
So much learned today.
Let's get to what's truly important here. Another H, Honduras.
Yes.
There's a lot happening in Honduras, Zoe, and those who follow People's Dispatch know all about it. But for those, rare few who aren't reading People's Dispatch every day, don't know who you are. Give us a sense of what's happening here. I think people maybe have some sense that tensions are rising between the United States and Honduras. Maybe they heard something about, anyway, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, well, when Xiomara Castro won the elections in Honduras, I feel like we must have had a conversation on Breakthrough discussing, okay, Xiomara Castro won the elections in Honduras. This was, the US's colony in Central America, what's going to happen? How is the US going to respond to a government that is actually in complete opposition to the US interests in that country? To remind people, the US really had a stranglehold on political life and economic, regulations in Honduras, and that intensified for many decades, and that became even more acute after the 2009 coup against Manuel Zelaya, by the way, backed by Hillary Clinton, lovely Democrat who really just helped them use the military to overthrow this democratically elected government, and following which, multinational corporations really were given kind of an open door. Honduras is open for business. And that was kind of how things worked for 12 years. Honduras also hosts the largest U.S. military base, definitely in the region, but one of the largest in the world. And so then you have the wife of Manuel Zelaya, who was overthrown in 2009, then winning the elections on a platform of we're going to fight against corruption, we're going to fight for our national sovereignty, we're going to rebuild the country and rescue it from these 12 years of US-backed misery. And so at the time, unclear how the US is kind of going to reorient itself to Honduras. And I give all this context because it's very important for kind of what happens next. Again, Xiomara Castro, when she took office in 2022, began a series of very important social, economic, and political reforms in the country, which again had really been devastated by 12 years of a narco dictatorship. She, for example, revoked, and with the Congress, revoked the law that would create special economic development zones where vulture capitalists from the United States essentially bought up pieces of Honduran land to exploit workers. A lot of very important moves which challenged the reign of multinational corporations and Western businessmen to essentially use Honduras as their playground. And all of this obviously was getting under the skin of these, vested economic interests. And at the same time, Honduras was also engaging in what is the Latin American integration process, participating in meetings side by side with Cuba and Venezuela, helping strengthen the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, CELAC, participating as an observer in al-Balah, which is, of course, the platform that was started by Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro in 2004 to be in opposition to the Free Trade of the Americas agreement. So little by little, it's becoming clear that actually Xiomara Castro is going to follow on her word and really present this existential threat to U.S. interests. And again, it wasn't, there are little signs here and there. How are they going to move? And it wasn't till some Honduran officials visited Venezuela following the elections that were held on July 28th, visited Venezuela in August, meeting with the defense minister of Venezuela, a bilateral meeting. Very normal. Two countries with bilateral relationships, with a lot of things in common, with, in the same region, a lot of the similar issues that they're facing, crime, drug trafficking, US-backed threats to their stability. And after this meeting that was held between the defense ministers of Honduras and Venezuela, a familiar thing happens, a familiar thing in history, in Latin American history, which is that the U.S. ambassador that's in Honduras decides that it is her duty to essentially criticize the decision of a sovereign government, Honduran government, to have meetings. And the U.S. ambassador essentially talks to Honduran press, which a lot of the Honduran media is controlled by these right-wingers who were ousted, essentially, who were kicked to the curb in the elections in 2021, who are just waiting to get back in power. She says to Honduran media that it's very worrying, it's very concerning that members of the Honduran government met with known drug traffickers in Venezuela. It's very concerning that these meetings were taking place when these are people who, who are accused of drug trafficking. Again, this is because of U.S. sanctions. They have slapped charges of drug trafficking on essentially all high-ranking Venezuelan officials. And following that, it sort of sets off a political hurricane within the Central American country. It becomes clear that there's attempts to essentially create dissension within the ranks of the Honduran army, an attempt to essentially oust the general of the Honduran army, Roosevelt. And in response to these sort of meddling efforts of the U.S. Embassy, Xiomara Castro tells the foreign minister to suspend the extradition treaty which exists between Honduras and the United States. Extradition treaties essentially saying that the U.S. can try people of Honduras in cases of drug trafficking and have them be extradited to the U.S. where they can be tried and convicted in court, which is what happened with Juan Orlando Hernandez. I'll stop it there because I know I just went on for a while. But I just think that the context is very important because obviously what's happened since then is not random.
Zoe, I'm curious if you could briefly explain what does the U.S. want with Honduras? Like, what's so special about Honduras? Well, I mean, Honduras has been under a sort of pro-U.S. right-wing rule for a very long time until Manuel Zelaya, and then he was ousted, and then Xiomara Castro, his wife. But for those moments when it is under sort of like pro-U.S. control, what is the U.S. getting out of Honduras? Why does imperialism care so much about this country?
Well, Honduras was a very useful country in many crucial parts of U.S. history. It has served as kind of this lily pad historically when, for example, El Salvador and Nicaragua were waging struggles for liberation, struggles against the local oligarchy, which was backed by the United States, guerrilla war. Honduras served as essentially, again, this lily pad for U.S. to coordinate counterinsurgency efforts. Again, it has the largest military base, so a lot of training going on there. And it didn't only hold this, military objective when trying to defeat these different guerrilla groups that were trying to, again, kind of recover their sovereignty and recover control over the country after, horrendous sorts of dictators were ruling over these countries. Like after the coup against Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, where the Guatemalan people waged several decades civil war. But of course, the economic interests are huge in Honduras. Honduras, again, is a country that has vast natural resource wealth. It is a country that was a huge banana producer. Again, it's another banana republic. And it essentially, again, it's very close to the United States. It's a place where it has sweatshops. There's a lot of textile production. And it's very convenient to have essentially a colony to the south of your borders where you can exploit workers, where you can pay them next to nothing. They produce clothing. They produce bananas for you. You can essentially steal all of their natural resources and not pay them anything. You can have military bases there. You can train them. You can make sure you have your kind of own mercenaries in the region to carry out your will. And another really important point is that Honduras has been a key link in the drug trafficking chain, which brings cocaine to the United States. It is not produced in Honduras, but it is a key part of the production and the kind of the transportation chain. So having a government that is subservient to your will, having a government that's going to obey all of your orders is very, very convenient for the United States, especially in a context where to the south, Nicaragua, of course, is in stark opposition to the United States, is definitely considered to be an enemy of the U.S., as they would say, as the U.S. government would say. So Honduras has been sort of this historic ally of the U.S. to really be able to keep control over its backyard.
Well, and let me ask you this as well here as we come to a close. I mean, obviously, we can't talk about any of these all these individual situations, but I mean, what we're seeing in Honduras, we saw, for instance, the president of the Mexican Senate speak out in solidarity with Xiomara Castro. And of course, there you have the right wing making various moves. You've got Colombia, where the right wing is using the legal system in particular, amongst many other extra legal things, to try to hobble any progressive change, the things that have already been going on in Ecuador. I mean, it feels that, in the context of maybe the past couple years, where we had sort of a resurgence of the pink tide. Now we seem to be seeing almost like a reconsolidation, the Empire Strikes Back effect, if you will, by the right wing in Latin America and their U.S. friends here against the processes that continue coming from below.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating. In the same week, U.S. ambassadors in both Mexico and Honduras openly criticized truly domestic issues that were taking place. So we saw the U.S. and Canadian ambassadors criticizing Mexico's judicial reform, which was a key project of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, which was passed actually and ratified this past Sunday. We saw the U.S. ambassador again in Honduras criticize Honduran officials. What's interesting is that they're actually being quite blatant about it. And what I think is interesting to note about the Honduran case is it's in direct retaliation to Honduras having a amicable relationship with Venezuela, which is actually one of the driving factors behind the coup d'etat in 2009. And they're being quite open and blatant about it. Of course, they're trying to fuel regime change in Venezuela. They haven't given up on that. They've maybe outsourced it to Eric Prince, who for some reason thinks he can crowdfund a regime change operation. But these attacks are kind of continuing. They've successfully, in some ways, I would say, divided this progressive bloc. We see Gabriel Boric, who's really been kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, attacking Venezuela, not really having words of sympathy for his colleagues of Gustavo Petro, who's constantly facing attempts by the right wing to undermine him. But what I think it speaks to is this broader challenge of these progressive governments to kind of maintain stability in what is a very difficult situation. Of course, in a lot of these countries, the right wing still holds economic control, they hold economic power, they have control over the media apparatuses. In a lot of countries, they have control over the judiciary, which is why the judicial reform in Mexico is so important. And so the right wing still has control over the key powers in the country, and they're continuing to use those to destabilize and undermine the executive, which, of course, was won by popular victory and popular will. But until there's actually structural transformation, until the state in these countries is able to actually, consolidate power in a more comprehensive way, give power back to the people, as we see the process happening in Venezuela and, of course, in Cuba, there's always going to be this threat. We saw it in Peru. Pedro Castillo was very quickly overthrown. Peru is a country where they did not waste time in using every single means to undermine this government, to charge him with corruption, to blast him in the media every single day, calling him corrupt, calling him a criminal. They really used all means necessary, and I think these cases serve as clear evidence of the risks of what it means to be kind of a progressive leader in a bourgeois liberal democracy, and what are these kind of latent weaknesses and just structural weaknesses when these elections are won. And what we've seen, the response to these, I think that a lot of these leaders have learned, because we've seen Xiomara called on the people of Honduras to mobilize in the streets when these coup threats were intensifying, when media is attacking them. She said, I won these elections because the Honduran people voted for me, and the Honduran people actually have my back. And they called a massive mobilization. Thousands, tens of thousands of people were in the streets to say, we defend this government. This is the government we voted for, and we're not going to let these, huge power groups in the country, which have ruled for decades, actually subvert the will of the people. So I think that we're seeing that there is a fight back. People are learning the lessons of what's happened to other governments, but the struggle is definitely not over.
Well, as always, you can follow everything going on in Honduras and just about every corner of the world on People's Dispatch. You are the editor of People's Dispatch, Zoe Alexandra. As always, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that was a fantastic rundown of yet more U.S. interference in another Latin American country. I mean, it's just unbelievable. They never stop.
Indeed, indeed. Well, speaking of another country in the Caribbean, Latin America region, where they never stop interfering, in every possible way, waging dirty wars, anything you can think of, that's Haiti. We want to turn to Haiti now, and we are very honored to be joined once again on the show by Dr. Jemima Pierre, who's a professor of global race at the Institute of Race, Gender, Sexuality, and Social Justice at the University of British Columbia, and also a member of Black Alliance for Peace. Jemima, as always, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, great to have you. I think the last time we talked about this on the show was just before the occupation began, and you predicted that this occupation of Haiti being carried out by Kenya and others at the behest of the United States and the core group would not bring anything positive to the Haitian people. Correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but it seems that your prediction was correct, that this has been a debacle and it has not improved the situation for Haitians on the ground.
Not at all. It's been embarrassing for the U.S. and they're trying to make it seem like something's happening, that the Kenyan forces, military police forces that are there are doing something. But the reality is all we've had from CNN are puff pieces about, a catering service from Georgia, the country of Georgia, feeding them, so they live in a tent. They're on, Haitians are saying that they're basically on vacation, hanging out in these big tents. And when they do go out on patrols, they hide behind the Haitian police, who are getting paid, by the way, 10 times less. I think Haitian police get about $250 a month, and these Kenyans are getting thousands. And so there's already a discrepancy and a lot of resentment of the fact that these Kenyan police are afraid. They don't do anything. At one point, they were guarding the U.S. embassy when they first got there. And so part of that is, you have to wonder what it is that you have 400 police. They're not even 400. They're saying the numbers are lower, about 380. And then just last week, the U.S. on a U.S. plane, Coast Guard plane, brought in 25, I think, Jamaican and Belizean police to be part of this force. And so it's a farce. Anthony Blinken was in Haiti about 10 days ago, lying about how great this MSS, the multinational mission, is doing, and saying that it helped open the airport, which is a lie, because we saw actually before the Kenyan forces came that Jackie Charles, the Miami Herald reporter, was walking through the Haiti airport with U.S. Special Forces. And so Haitians know they're lying, that they haven't done anything. If anything, a lot of the armed groups have actually spread out to other places, and they're acting, almost, tempting them to come after them, tempting the Kenyans to go after them. So it's been a complete farce.
I'm curious, not to center the U.S. so much here, but the U.S. is responsible for so much destruction in Haiti. But the issue of Haitian immigrants specifically has become a national headline in this presidential race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And what's interesting about that, and the racism in it from, frankly, both parties, is how the actual issues affecting the country of Haiti are completely absent from the way that's covered. So I'm just curious your thoughts as we've seen this issue of Haitian immigrants sort of in the national media while ignoring what's being done to Haiti at the moment.
Yes, I think, what's interesting to me is to say that it is not only J.D. Vance and the Republican Trump and that are racist when it comes to Haiti. The entire U.S. media apparatus, U.S. imperialism is racism. And so, yes, we can talk about, Donald Trump saying Haitians eat pets, but then, what's more racist than thinking that Haitians can't run themselves, that you have to actually control them and occupy them? What's more racist than sending foreign military to invade and occupy a country? What's more racist than Joe Biden's deportation policies, which is worse than two terms of Obama, who's considered deporter in chief, and worse than Trump's term? And the fact that there's still deportation planes going back to Haiti by the Biden administration. Let's remember last year what happened when the Texas Rangers were whipping Haitian migrants at the Texas-Mexico border under the Biden administration. This 2 years ago, sorry. Let's remember that all this happened under the Biden administration. So of course, we can talk about racism, but the racism is not unique to the Republicans. Also, the racism goes a long way. I don't know if people remember. I'm old enough to remember being called dirty boat people. I remember this is in the 80s. I remember in the 90s when the CDC said the Haitians were HIV and AIDS carriers, and so they had the four H's, the hemophiliacs. Haitians was the only ethnic group that they said, and then being kids, we couldn't even donate blood because they said our blood was tainted. I remember that's how you had the U.S. use Guantanamo Bay for Haitian asylum seekers without due process and keeping them in this open air prison because they thought Haiti was were HIV holders. I remember, saying, Pat, what's his name, the Christian minister saying that it's because of voodoo that the 2010 earthquake happened. And we remember for the past 3 years, the Western media, the same media that's basically going crazy saying, oh, this is a lie about Haitians. It's the same media that said Haiti is nothing but a bunch of gangs and cannibals, right? Up until this past spring, they were calling Haitians cannibals. And so it's the Western media that opened up the space, that created the space for people to believe any crazy racist stereotype about Haiti, because they've been presenting us as if we're nothing but gangs, as if all we do is cause violence, as if we can't rule ourselves.
I'm so glad you brought up the role of the media, because there's a recent Washington Post editorial about, what should happen in Haiti. It's interesting that, they're the authorities. Yes. And one of the things they noted is they were talking about, because, this is the so-called transitional government, and there's supposed to be, elections in 2026. But they said that was too soon. And to connect a couple issues, I thought it was interesting, because at the same time, we're also seeing the prime minister, Kony, say he wants to double the size of the military. So as much as we're being told that this is, facilitating democracy in Haiti, I mean, it feels to me that the undercurrent here is preparing a real sort of dictatorship style solution, as actually Michel Martelly said a long time ago, the Fujimori solution for Haiti. I mean, it really feels like behind the rhetoric, that's a lot of what's happening here.
Yes, definitely. I just found out, for example, a few days ago that Conil, the prime minister, that, by the way, none of these people who are calling themselves the government of Haiti have been elected. The U.S. handpicked who would be part of the so-called transitional government, and they made the deal in a hotel room in Jamaica. And so let's remember that. But the other thing I just found out was that Cornel's father was a minister in the Duvalier dictatorship. He's a right-wing, so just remember, he served under the even though he had problems with Martelly, but he served under that government. Right. So he's very much linked to the Duvalier dictatorship, including his in-laws, Marc Bazin, the World Bank autocrat that the U.S. tried to put against Aristide in the 1989 elections. And so let's see who's running Haiti. The Presidential Council has, a majority of the former party, the same old political people, the PHTK, they're in there. And so what the U.S. wants is a permanent military presence. And so Kony, who has no votes whatsoever, who's a long-term UN person that the U.S. put in, and that has agreed to everything down to abstaining on a vote in the UN yesterday against the vote calling for Israel to stop its occupation of Palestine. Real Haitians would never do that. But that's the use of Haiti. And the other thing, let's remember, the U.S. because of the U.S., they've destroyed about 500 houses around the airport. They said that was to support the security mission, right? So my sense is the U.S. is trying to keep a permanent military presence there, and it's trying to use the UN as cover. And this mission is for cover because, these Kenyans are just warm bodies for a larger foreign occupation. We have to remember that. The U.S. wanted to have that there to keep it there. And so they're going to say we're running elections as they occupy the country. And they brought in all these puppets to run this government, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs who's who doesn't really know what's going on. Her first thing when she first got in was like, we don't need reparations for France. And now she's changing tune. But these are the people that the US has put in charge. That to me is racist. Like this idea that Haitians, we are as old, we are the first free republic in the hemisphere, freer than the US. We've been around for 220 years, and you have the nerve to tell us that it's not time yet for us to have sovereignty when you strip and steal and snuff it out of us with your behind your military and your control of the media and the international apparatuses. So this is the US. And until we realize that all these things are related, the fact that the U.S. can get Haiti to vote against Palestine, the fact that the U.S. can get Haiti to open up its doors for these foreign invaders to come and steal and strip our sovereignty and steal our resources, until we see that the problem, the biggest gangsters of is the U.S., we're not going to actually be able to solve what's going on in the world and in the region.
No, I think that's an incredibly good point, and I think this is something that we're going to have to continue to watch very closely because obviously UN General Assembly Week is next week. One just really quick thing I want to ask you before we let you go here. What is behind, you think, these sanctions on Martelly? Because, I mean, obviously he was such a creation of the Clintons and the Americans, and he was the golden boy of the United States. Now they're trying to, say he's a drug trafficker and all these negative things, which maybe he is. But what do you think is behind the switch there?
I think the U.S. knows that Martelly controls the armed groups in Haiti. The elite control the armed groups in Haiti. And I think, that's what people are saying, that he let them get too much out of control. And I think this is a warning. These sanctions that they put on Martelly are he doesn't lose his property. He just can't travel. So these are very light. For somebody who's behind drugs and armed groups, this is the lightest sanctions placed on this man because he's the U.S.'s boy, and they're going to hold on to him. And they had to do the sanctions. I think they're just trying to give him a lesson so that he can reel in the gangs that he controls, because he's the one that controls. Martelly has a lot more power than people think in Haiti. His political party is still in control, still has power in Haiti, and the U.S. is still using them. Right? And the U.S. still supports Martelly. Don't believe anything you hear. And I also want to say the U.S. is going to try to turn this mission, so-called mission, multinational mission, into a full UN occupation force. In fact, Haïti Liberté found the document, the draft resolution, which was co-written with Ecuador, to turn this mission into a full UN occupation, which is a Minister 2.0 into Haiti. So we have to, and they're meeting on Haiti September 30th. So we have to keep track of that. We have to pay attention because what they're going to do is use the UN because it's cheaper for the US to use foreign soldiers, but for its own foreign policy objectives in the region.
Well, having Ecuador involved, that's ominous given the role they played in the 90s. Well, so many things we're going to have to see and so many things we're going to have to follow, and we are going to do the best we can. And thankfully, we have people like you, Dr. Jemima Pierre, to help us sort through it all. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
My goodness. Oh, again, and U.S. imperialism never sleeps.
Never.
And
how could they? Because obviously they're doing so much evil. If they slept, people might change their mind. But no, I think Jemima's 100% correct here. They're definitely gonna try to do a little something. It's gonna be a big topic, even if it doesn't make news next week on the UN General Assembly meeting, how they can, try to find a way to manipulate this into a full UN mission, permanent occupation. Travis Ross, by the way, has been doing some great work on the Global Fragility Act and the use of Haiti as a laboratory for this new sort of act that America's put together to control various countries that it claims are collapsing. Very interesting stuff, writing a lot about that in Haiti Liberté if you want to check it out. But crucial issue, one that I really wish was getting more positive coverage somewhere, but we'll keep doing.
We're more in-depth coverage. Isn't it just this, we're only going to cover it because Trump is saying they're eating animals or something.
I know.
So ridiculous.
I know.
Clown show of a country that we
and
have.
if the brother who said the thing about the geese, I know you've recanted now. If you're watching, my man, what are you doing right now?
Could you imagine he's a Breakthrough News watcher?
I mean, listen, maybe. I'm just saying, if
sounds like he needs to watch Breakthrough
News,
there,
actually. Get it together. Like, people he didn't even know it was a secondhand story. Like, come on. Sometimes it be your own people. And that's how I felt. I don't even know why I said that. But I was so dismayed to even see that it was a black guy saying this. So I'm glad he's recanted.
Hey, Black Americans are subjected to the same propaganda every American is when it comes to immigrants. So
I'm glad he's recanted. I'll say that.
Yeah.
So let's move forward here to another critically important issue. That's the ongoing criminalization happening of students all across the United States for their participation in very legal protest actions against the genocide in Palestine. And we are very, very honored to be joined here by Salma Hamami, who is a recent graduate of the University of Michigan. While there, she was president of the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter, among other students now being criminalized for just doing the right thing. I guess I'm editorializing, but I think I can say that. Salma, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, great to have you here. And before we get into what's happening to you all now, the actions that have been taken against you, I really just wanted to start a little bit with the encampment that took place at U of M when you were there, and why it was important for you and other students to come out and be a part of this movement that was sweeping campuses all across the United States.
Yeah, so one of the most beautiful, prominent, and powerful aspects of these encampments and of the popular universities for Gaza is that it drew attention to the fact that Palestine has become an international language. It has produced a language of liberation that transcends boundaries and political borders, and has shown that the Palestinian liberation movement is producing the knowledge necessary for the world we hope to build. And our encampments and our protests shattered the confines of what they thought being pro-Palestinian meant. It undid the threads of the imperial fabric that they have been using to suffocate us for so long. It retold the stories that they tried to lie about. They hated seeing the physical and unwavering display of a movement dedicated to Palestinian liberation. And they hated seeing the unity that was brought forth within these encampments. They hated seeing the Jum'ah prayers in one corner of our encampment while Shabbat and Christian services took place in the corner right across from it. They hated seeing the community that was fostered through our encampment on the basis of us standing there for Gaza, and they hated seeing our educational teach-ins and daily programming and disruptions. And the protests and these encampments embodied the strength of the student movement. It was important for us to not only do everything within our power to demonstrate, but to also, continuously remind ourselves that we are the number one funders of this genocide through our university endowment and through our tax dollars. And so we had a responsibility to camp out. We had a responsibility to plant our feet firm, and we had a responsibility to disrupt the status quo. And that is what these encampments embodied. And one of the pivotal reasons as to why the Palestinian movement and these actions were so critical.
I mean, yeah, it's really, really important that you and other students around the country took it upon yourselves to create these encampments in the first place. But of course, there's been repercussions for that. So with these charges, can you explain to us what are the actual charges and how does it feel to see these statements, which must be quite scary, I would imagine, by the Attorney General, essentially suggesting that pro-Palestine protests were violent or somehow some kind of safety threat?
Yeah, so the criminal charges at the state level ordered by Attorney General are an unprecedented escalation against the movement for divestment. 11 of us are currently facing a mix of felony charges and misdemeanor charges ranging from trespassing to obstruction and so forth. And the Attorney General press release indicates that the cases were initially taken due to their multi-jurisdictional nature, but none of the charges issued implicated more than a single jurisdiction. And this overreach is entirely political and designed to punish and suppress voices protesting genocide. And her rhetoric of our encampment being violent or a safety threat is entirely a lie. The Gaza Solidarity Encampment was established to demand divestment from apartheid and genocide. It stood there for 30 days strong until our university police department was directed to attack campers and to destroy the encampment. And the administration used these claims of fire safety as justification to brutally and violently sweep the camp. And there is a very bitter irony in the fact that U of M claims concerns about fire safety intents while refusing to divest their endowment dollars from being used to aid the bombing and burning of people in literal tents in refugee camps in Gaza. And the morning of the raid, UMPD, which is our university police department, dressed in riot gear, armed with batons and deep freeze, which is known as a chemical agent with the highest grade possible for a mix of both pepper spray and tear gas, attacked the encampment, sending 4 people to the hospital with concussions, broken arms, respiratory diseases. They destroyed thousands of dollars worth of equipment and personal belongings. And the notion that the students and those protesting the genocide were somehow violent is entirely a projection of their own actions and the politicization of these charges, and ultimately in their attempt to trying to suppress the movement. And, my initial reaction when seeing the press release and the statement, I couldn't help but laugh. This is not a testament to our inability to succeed, but rather it's a testament to their inability to suppress us. And the fact that they had to fill their press release and interviews with countless lies and notions of violence only made us feel far more united in our movement, because we know that we are on the right side of history and that this form of suppression will ultimately only breed more resistance.
Mm-hmm. I saw Representative Rashida Tlaib make an interesting point in relation to this, and she noted that the Attorney General has so far failed to deliver any real justice for the victims of the Flint water crisis, but is aggressively going after you all for, just protesting against a genocide. And I just wonder, thinking about that backdrop, if it feels that some element, at least, of these charges is rooted in the sort of racism and Islamophobia in certainly the Michigan, but also the U.S. justice system.
Yeah, these charges absolutely reflect elements of racism and Islamophobia within the state of Michigan. And it's just evidently clear because Nessel should instead be focusing on delivering justice for the victims of Rick Snyder's Flint water crisis, which poisoned thousands, and she ultimately failed to do so. And instead, she's choosing to go after protesters of conscience who cannot sit by and watch their tax money or their university endowment and public institution money contribute to the genocide. But again, the fact that the state attorney general feels compelled enough to charge student protesters, it is a testament to their fear for the movement of how we are, steadfast in our commitment towards Palestinian liberation. And the entire situation that has taken place on campus is one that is filled with anti-Palestinian racism, Islamophobic rhetoric, because our university administration continues to push us in this narrative as though we are uncivilized. They have referenced our actions as uncivilized, as an unpopular, dissentful movement. But in reality, the sheer amount of supporters and the sheer amount of strength that we have built on our campus through our coalition at the student level, at the student government level, at the faculty level, at the alumni level, all of whom in the majority have supported the call for divestment, have supported Palestinian liberation, Palestinian freedom. Yet the administration is more so interested in maintaining their investments and hedge fund within our university, as opposed to actually tackling on the true issues that we bring forth.
As this new year starts, I'm curious, what message do you have for other students who are just coming into campus this fall, who are outraged by the genocide, but also they see what happens at a place like University of Michigan and then other college campuses around the country where there's repressive measures like this, and then they're wondering whether they should even be exercising their legal right to protest?
Well, I would hope that at every moment of repression, it only ignites people to take action even further. I would hate for anyone to use my example of facing charges as a mean to not take action. The sacrifices of our people do not perish in vain. We do not do this only for people to react and hide, but rather to react and take action. And the suppression that we're seeing at these unprecedented rates, again, it's not inability of us to exercise our power, our political commitment and power to the Palestinian people. But again, it's rather a sign of their desperation, not a sign of our futility. And your silence ultimately will never protect you, nor will it protect the Gazan people. only actions and uprisings will grant us and our future generations safety. So we call on the Attorney General Dana Nessel to drop the politicized charges immediately. We demand that President Santaono and the Board of Regents and their campaign of violence and intimidation against students, university workers, and community members end immediately. And we also, at the end of the day, refuse to cower to carceral intimidation. We refuse to back down in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And we will remain resolute in our commitment to the struggle for Palestinian liberation, demanding divestment from weapons manufacturers and our university's complicity in the genocide against the Palestinian people. So I hope what people take from this and take from the student intifada and the student encampments is that there is no amount of repression or sacrifice that could ever be great enough to put you into a corner and to prevent you from taking action. We are the number one funders of this genocide. We are indebted to the Palestinian people as we live in the heart of the empire, in the belly of the beast of Turtle Island. We are absolutely indebted. And I hope that people take these examples and instead use it as a form of action and not as a form of suppression and silence. This is the best time for us to unite and to push further and to call for a liberated Palestine, to call for divestment, and to call for an arms embargo as well.
Well, Salma, really appreciate you joining us here on the show. I know you probably have a lot going on, so thanks for some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, I mean, it's just incredible that these young people who have a lot to lose, they haven't even started their professional careers, are willing to put so much on the line. But you got to sacrifice something when it comes to these kinds of situations. Like everybody in their own way, right? And not everybody has to go be charged with something. But, if we want to stop a genocide and if we want to create a better world, there's definitely going to be consequences for that. And so I think it's really brave.
Yeah, no, fantastic that they did that encampment. I thought it was, very powerful all around the country. And the fact that people are standing strong all around the country despite being criminalized is super important, super important. Yes. Well, before we get out of here today, Rania, I wanted to just say a little something about the case of Marcellus Williams, who's set to be executed by the state of Missouri on September 24th, despite the fact that there is essentially no legitimate evidence whatsoever that he committed the crime that he has been imprisoned for, and where the justice system has refused to give him, any real fair hearing on the fact that there's a lack of evidence. This case has been going on since 1998. Marcellus Williams, again in Missouri, he was charged with the murder of Felicia Gale, who was a reporter at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Very, very brutal murder. She was found stabbed in her home. And ultimately, Marcellus Williams, actually several years later, was fingered by someone who was in prison and was offered, essentially an incentive. But the point I want to make here, and the important element of this before we get into some of that, is that he is set to be executed, but I can't even stress the lack of evidence that exists in the case of Marcellus Williams. So in the case of Miss Gale, whoever did kill her left a huge amount of evidence at the scene. They left fingerprints, they left footprints, they left hair, and they left DNA on the murder weapon, which was a knife that was found in the kitchen. None of that matches Marcellus Williams. So that means that they have fingerprints, footprints, hair, and DNA, and none of it matches Marcellus Williams. But on September 24th, he's set to be executed for this crime. In 2016, they tested the murder weapon and found out that it did not match him. So not that long ago, an affirmative situation that he did not match him. The reason I'm bringing that up is that evidence has never even been heard by a court because of some of what took place. The reason he was, the evidence that was used was the testimony of two people, one of whom I already mentioned, who had very lengthy criminal cases of their own and were offered leniency and other incentives in their own criminal cases to testify against him. They were also, by other incentives, I mean reward money. So two people who have every reason in the world to save their own skins and to get reward money who testified against him. Now, what's important about that is they made statements that were inconsistent with their own statements, which meant that they contradicted themselves. The statements contradicted each other. The statements were also inconsistent with the actual evidence at the crime scene. So there's actually no evidence. Oh, and by the way, none of it could be independently verified. The only link they had is they said, well, Marcellus Williams, someone, he sold a laptop that had belonged to the victim. But the thing that they don't tell you about that is the person who gave him the laptop was one of these people testifying against him. So what their involvement was in the murder, interesting question, right? But what we know for sure, again, is that none of the DNA evidence on the murder weapon does not match Marcellus Williams. The footprints, the fingerprints, and the hair that was left at the scene does not match Marcellus Williams. That the two witnesses that they had were people who were incentivized to testify for leniency in their own cases and who gave multiple statements that were inconsistent with the actual evidence at the crime scene and contradicted both themselves and each other. And for that reason, he was put in, or with that thin of evidence, he was put in jail. Just to add another point to this, his jury was 11 white people and 1 black person. And the prosecutor in the case has a record that has been documented of racially discriminatory jury selection. And in fact, in St. Louis County, where this took place, people who killed a white person, basically, were 3.5 times more likely to receive the death penalty than if you killed a black person. So as we know, all across the country, the death penalty is essentially the same thing as the lynch mob was during the Jim Crow era. And we can see this in the case of Marcellus Williams, that he was tried by a jury that was set up to benefit from the racism that exists in Missouri and the United States of America, that the charges were trumped up, that witnesses were incentivized to testify against him, that DNA evidence was completely excluded from any criminal trial. And it was so bad that in 2017, the then governor actually said, let's put a stay of execution. We're going to put in a board of inquiry that's going to look into this. You're not supposed to be able to execute someone until the board comes with some sort of issue. But because the current governor, Mike Parson, wants to look tough on crime, which has its own racial coding, especially in a state like Missouri, in 2023, he just dissolves the board of inquiry while it's ongoing. So just ignoring all this other evidence. And then, of course, right after that, they reinstate his death sentence. So again, Marcellus Williams, set to be executed on September 24th, despite the fact that the huge amount of DNA evidence in the scene, footprints, fingerprints, hair, DNA on the weapon, that none of it matches him, that the two witnesses against him are completely and totally compromised with information that not only cannot be independently verified, but is contradictory to their own statements, each other, and the scene of the crime. And just to put the cherry on it, the family of the victim does not want him to be executed. But nonetheless, the courts have refused to hear any of his pleas. They have turned him down again and again. The DNA evidence has never been heard. So now activists and organizers around the country and the state of Missouri are calling on people to call the governor, Parson, and put pressure on him to not carry out this execution September 24th. They're doing a big campaign saying that 417-373-3400, 417-373-3400, that number, which is the governor's number, should be called, is what advocates are encouraging people to do if they think this is completely and totally outrageous, which from my point of view, completely and totally outrageous. And again, for educational purposes, the governor's phone number in Missouri is 417-373-3400. And if you feel so moved, of course, you can say whatever you want to say. But there's just a few days left. Marcellus Williams on death row. From my point of view, he seems completely innocent. No evidence whatsoever. The victim's family doesn't want him to be executed. I mean, I don't know what else you can say and what you can do here. It's just the purposes of racism from this governor that he's trying to do this. And I think he needs to be put on notice that the people of the United States are not going to stand for this. That's my opinion on this, at least, Rania.
Oh, it's such a massive injustice, and it's the fact that like nobody even is talking about it internationally speaking. I mean, the U.S. goes on tirades of we need to regime change this country because they, harmed somebody, and it's like you're killing innocent people. Racist killings of innocent people, lynchings, as you put it. It's basically just a legal lynching. It's completely outrageous. So please do exactly as Eugene said and, make some noise about this because it's really just unbelievable, unacceptable. And I don't even know what else to add.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that'll bring us to the end of our show here today. Big shout out to everyone who joined. Big shout out to everyone who watched us here. Of course, you're watching on YouTube. Big shout out to you. If you're watching on Free Speech TV, huge shout out to you. Big shout out to the Free Speech TV team for making it possible for us to appear on your platform. Kirk Dougherty, we see your donation. Thank you. Tragedy equals comedy. We see your donation as well. Thank you so much. Rania, anything you want to leave our viewers with before we close?
Yes, always. I want to remind our viewers that we are an independent media outlet, meaning that Lockheed Martin does not fund us. Yeah. Therefore, we need you to help sustain us so we can keep growing and keep bringing you the actual news and not the one that the State Department feeds you. That means going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month, where you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But more importantly, and well, you can also give more than $5. I'm just saying.
You get $5 million.
But more importantly, you can help keep Breakthrough News going. So patreon.com/breakthrough news, and make sure you have smashed that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for watching. For myself, for Rania, for our whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.
Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.